Welcome to Now Let's Talk, the podcast with Vanessa Corwin and Kathleen Kahn, where we speak with our guests about the joys and challenges of life in today's world. Hello, I'm Vanessa Corwin.
And I'm Kathleen Kahn.
Teja VanWicklen is a writer and consultant focused on self-defense for women. Trained in martial arts, among other things, she has overseen stunt performances for major events and films. Her book, Reimagining Self-Defense for Women, details what's wrong with martial arts training for women and how to fix it. She joins us today. Welcome, Teja. Tell us more about your background, which is quite varied, and what inspired you to write this book?
Like a lot of girls in the early 80s, I started in ballet, and I loved it. But we went away one summer to Long Beach Island, New Jersey, to the beach, and I couldn't do ballet there after doing ballet in Manhattan. There wasn't really anything available, but we happened to rent a house, and the house behind us uh, was a Taekwondo family. The father was an instructor, and the son was an 11-year-old brown belt, or at that time red belt, in Taekwondo. And I would watch him performing these beautiful moves that were actually very ballet-like. He'd be holding his leg up high and, doing these graceful movements. And I thought, okay, maybe I could do this summer. So I began training with them, and I never went back because though I was thin, I had big legs, and the big legs that I had that were perfect for Taekwondo were my ballet teacher was telling me I needed to lose weight. If you can imagine such a thing for a 14-year-old girl whose family was telling her she was too skinny. Because I just had all my weight. I had bigger legs, but I was still skinny everywhere else, very skinny everywhere else.
And then people that age, their bodies change, know.
So yeah, there was a lot of, my mother was not thrilled with that. But so I Taekwondo was it, and I started there like a lot of people did, because in those days you didn't have a lot of options. Now you have a lot of options. You have Japanese jiu-jitsu, Brazilian jiu-jitsu, judo. You have Krav Maga. You have you have so many options. So that's where I ended up, and I was there for probably 10 or 15 years, and then I started to realize as I got older and life got more serious. And I had a lot of martial arts friends who were outside of Taekwondo, that there was a lot of stuff missing from my training, and that Taekwondo was predominantly a sports art, but not really a self-defense practice. And the problem is that whatever you train in, you tend to see the world from that. It's the old, if all you have is a hammer, everything looks like a nail. And that's a really important analogy, because when you are spending most of your time kicking and perfecting the art of kicking, you're sure that kicking is the answer to any kind of physical situation where you need to, right? And then you're told as a woman that women's legs are stronger than the rest of their body, so they should be using the strongest part of their body. And that sounds perfectly logical. But a woman's legs are not necessarily stronger than a man's whole body, which is what he's going to be using against you. And they are not your only resource by any means, so you should not be depending on those. And I can speak from experience when I say that I had a drunk friend aggress on me once, and he would not take no for an answer. And I spun and kicked him in the midsection, which now I would never do, because that's not where you kick somebody. And it didn't even faze him. And that was my kick that my tournament kick that I broke 6 inches of solid pine with. And he just braced for it and said, "Nice kick," and kept coming. So I ended up having to talk him down anyway. So you need other resources, is what I'm saying. You need other tools, and you need to understand a bigger picture.
All the reasons that you've just described that is wrong with self-defense training for women is I imagine your book is unique in that sense, that you don't just focus on one thing.
When people ask me how to get self-defense training, I tend to suggest several books to them, because books are the best way to start, since you only want to use physical force when there's no other option, because even if you use it well and you get lucky, you're still likely to suffer certain consequences. Getting physical is always, you're always risking some sort of damage, psychological, physical damage, whatever, somebody else's damage. So you really want it to be the last resort. And if it's the last resort, why are we spending the most time on it and not the most time on the things that keep us out of trouble? And you can train in Taekwondo or anything that you want. You just need to understand that what you're getting is center of gravity and power and certain other things, but you're also gaining maybe a few bad habits too. Because in a lot of these martial arts, you stand around while someone does some moves and you get used to standing still, or you get used to being hit in a certain place or not being hit at all, not reacting fast enough, not working on reaction time. So it's rather complicated, and the mental stuff is not as exciting, but it's a lot more helpful. But it's also a lot harder to teach, which is why it doesn't get taught. But I didn't find any books that covered everything I wanted to cover. I was looking for a system, like a way to systematize the training so that instructors and martial arts geeks could find answers and synthesize their own answers and not be forced to go back to what's already been done for thousands of years, right? We need a clean slate, something that addresses women in the current state they're in now.
You talk about the concept of protective offense. So, can you explain what that is and why it's important?
Well, protective offense is just, I didn't love the term self-defense. It, first of all, it's just about protecting yourself, and often women have children with them or parents or, other people they're responsible for. So self is kind of diminishing the extent of the, of the process. And defense it is defensive in legal terms, but you can use offense to protect yourself defensively, and I advise it, because defending yourself against a man with a knife, it kind of gives the impression and the feeling of trying to avoid the knife and keep it from making contact. That's probably not what you probably want to think more in terms of hitting him with something, or knocking the knife out of his hand or something, which is offensive thinking. So I think part of it was the mindset. I didn't, and also self-defense is a legal term that you use to explain a very complex situation in which you did everything that you could, and therefore you had to hurt him in self-defense. But self-defense for the purpose of training, I think protective offense for the purpose of self-defense is a better mental picture.
One of the things you just hit on was parents with children. They're walking around. What are the most unique challenges for them if they're moving a thing with kids in it? What happens?
Well, the whole time I was training, I was always asking, does the fact that I'm smaller, and I have shorter arms and legs, and men, aggress on me a different way than they aggress on other men. And there was never any difference, really. The situation was, the training was the same for men and for women, and I thought that was odd. And I always had questions, and I got knocked down for questions. It was, "Oh, Tej, you just do the work." It's the same in school, just do your homework and stop asking so many questions. But what happened was I was already concerned about what I wasn't learning and what was missing. But when I had my son, I was greatly diminished. I had a number of health issues all of a sudden that came with the pregnancy, including postpartum depression, which is not a popular thing to talk about, but I think it's a necessary thing to talk about, because it made me feel even weaker and more diminished than the pregnancy did. I was in very bad shape. And all of a sudden, I guess I have it to thank for the book, because all of a sudden I felt catastrophically unprepared for anything that might happen to me. And that was with 30 years of martial arts training, training with, military personnel in the woods, and doing survival
Wow.
training and EMT training and all this stuff. And I was just felt like I had no answers. I was wearing this tiny little being attached to my chest most of the time, because he was ADHD and he had to be on my body or else he was very pissed off. And I thought, well, what if something happens? What do I do? I can't kick and punch with him wearing him. That's a crazy thing to think
Right.
about. What would I do? And so, because my first inclination was I've got to hit this from, what are the best techniques in a situation where someone aggresses on you and tries to strangle you or hits you with something or whatever, or pushes you or pulls you into a car. What are the best techniques? And everything I came up with fell short because of a child. And that started a whole new process of thinking. And that meant I had to drop every bit of knowledge about the training that I had done in the past, put everything on a shelf to reference maybe for later, but start in the workshop with nothing, with an empty table, and forget about physical stuff until I got to that point. And the book does absolutely very carefully address uh, physical self-defense, but it addresses it in a different way. It doesn't address it as here's what to do when this happens, here's what to do when that happens. It addresses it as it's not an easy thing to talk about. How do you do the most damage in the shortest period of time when you've tried every other option for escape? Because you always, legally and ethically and in terms of safety, if you can escape, you escape. You only fight when there's nothing else you can do. And if you fight, you don't want to tap him. You don't want to let him know that you're ready to fight. You don't want to give away the fact that you have a weapon. He's fighting dirty. You fight dirty, which means you do several things. You do them very well, very quickly, and in a relatively brutal way. And you don't do those things without exercising all other options.
Right.
Can you give us an example of something that you might do if you're in a situation?
Yeah, I mean, as if you're with your child and someone corners you and says, "Hey, lady, do what I tell you, or I won't hurt your baby." The problem is criminals lie. If you are cornered and someone wants something from you, generally we call them resource predators. Resource predators, if they want something, they'll tell you what they want, and if you give it to them, you have a better chance of being okay because they want the resource, they want the thing, they want your car, they want your money, your wallet, whatever. And especially if you have a kid with you, antagonizing him is probably not the way to go. But if you have someone who wants something from your person and not a thing that you can give them, you're in the presence of a different kind of criminal. And these types of criminals are especially unlikely to tell the truth. If you cannot leave, if you cannot fool him, if you cannot, then you hit him with something and you do it hard and fast. Some things you can pick up and do damage with.
Mhm.
Sharp things work on the inside of the body. Hard things work on bones and soft tissue. Depending on how someone's holding you, there are short, quick things you can do. You can headbutt somebody. I talk about
Mhm.
where and how, from the back or from the front.
Mhm.
Um, you can break fingers, which makes it harder for someone to grab you.
Oh.
If you can do something more catastrophic, you probably want to do that. But if a finger happens to be what you're holding on to at the time, grabbing a couple of fingers with your whole hand can really work. Pain compliance is generally not what I recommend, um, because there are levels of determination in criminals. There are ways I discuss in the book that you can tell
Mhm.
determination. You can discern determination, and these are some of the skill sets that you
Mhm.
gain, right? You look at your surroundings, you see what kind of resources you have, you understand what kind of criminal you're being confronted with based on what he's asking you. You
Mhm.
consider um, things that you say and the way that he reacts, and you're looking for your exits and you're understanding where you can go and what you can do, right? Is there anyone outside that's likely to hear you? Is screaming likely to go unheard? Because if you can get away, you do that, especially if you have a kid with you.
Mhm.
And then there are the issues like, can you carry the kid? Can the kid run? Is it a baby? Do you have multiples? Are you pregnant? Right? All of these things make this particular situation a really, really catastrophic and difficult to address
Mhm.
issue. And you'd think that in all of the martial arts classes that are out there and all the different styles of self-defense that are out there, that people would be discussing this. And I just found that they're not, which just blew me away.
Oh, right. Yeah, it's when you're really vulnerable. So
That-
what you do talk about the breakdown of violent crime. So So what does that mean, and why is it important in self-defense?
Well, this is a perfect place for that, because so as soon as I realized that you have to only, with a baby, a child with you, you're only going to fight if it's your last possible option. I had to work backwards. And then I started to ask myself, so where are the inflection points? Like, what we need are how to break things down so that there's a sort of understanding of where we can make changes to the situation, and where we can adapt our thinking, and where we can gather information, and how exactly how a crime evolves,
Hmm.
so that we can see it earlier. Because what happens is we're doing our thing, we're walking down the street, and all of a sudden somebody does something. Well, there were probably signs before that, like the fact that you saw the guy in the coffee shop. He was standing next to you and he asked you for a sugar to pass him a sugar packet, and you didn't notice that he was the guy who was walking next to you the whole time, that he had in fact followed you, right? So there are signs that we can learn to notice, so that we have more information. And what I ended up doing was, when I kind of left the traditional martial arts situation, going to classes and seminars and things like that, I started to gather people, and look for other people who were thinking this way. And I found some people, and we kind of formed a think tank. And the initial people were Eric Kondo and Kathy Jackson and Rory Miller. And Eric Kondo is a really amazing guy who's a jujitsu stylist and instructor, Brazilian jiu-jitsu, I believe, small circle jiu-jitsu, which is like floor wrestling and that kind of stuff. And he builds his own wheelchairs because he is paraplegic from a motorcycle accident when he was 19.
Wow.
So he is a guy who understands the vulnerability of other people. And we did a lot of talking, and he had come up with this really wonderful tool that law enforcement was using called the 5 Ds of self-defense, which gave you the steps that you would take if someone was aggressing on you. It was decide, deter, disrupt, disengage, and debrief. I then spoke with, through Rory and Eric, I met Mark McYoung. Mark McYoung is he's an expert witness, and for criminal cases, and a really interesting guy. And he had come up with something called the 5 stages of violent crime, which was intent, interview, positioning, attack, and reaction. And those were the steps that criminals took to get to the end of where they wanted to go. And I thought, well, Eric and Mark, thank you. Because these two 5-step tools together, one from the point of view of the defender, one from the point of view of the attacker, fit perfectly together and gave me a timeline that I call the self-defense continuum. And that's what the whole book is based on.
Are these, I think they are the tips to stay off the criminal radar. That's what you're talking about.
Yes.
Or be aware of what's
Right.
around.
It starts with awareness, but
Yeah.
how, right? You hear about situational awareness all the time, but what is it and how do you accomplish it, right? So it's about that. It's about noticing when someone has targeted you in some way. Something's off. And it
Right.
doesn't mean you should start wondering if everyone's after you, panicking every time someone does something weird. Sometimes people are just odd, or they're just curious, or they're just lonely, right? And there are ways to discern that as well, because we start looking at groups of behavior. It's a series of events, of behaviors that come together and inform your intuition. And it's a practice like anything else. And the problem with that is that it's not sexy. People want to like be able to say, hey, this guy like did this to me and I did this thing and I got away and yay me. It's not so much fun to say, I got this weird feeling from this dude, so I just left.
I think, I may be wrong, that people that live in urban areas like New York City have more awareness of what's going on around them than if you're, driving down a lovely lane in the country.
Interestingly, I think they both do and don't. There are different kinds of and different levels and different kinds of situational awareness. And people who live in the country are aware of sounds. If there's a lot of quiet, they're aware of sounds.
Mm-hmm.
They're aware of weather. They're aware of changes in the environment. They're aware of the new car, the sound of a particular
Yeah.
car, right?
Interesting.
It's interesting. And New Yorkers are very good at certain kinds of, they're very good at discerning that the guy who's screaming curses on the corner is probably not dangerous.
Right.
They're very good at discerning when people are walking a little too close because everybody walks close. So when there's something a little more uncomfortable, right? But they're not necessarily, they're also used to a lot of chaos.
Mhm.
So they're not always used to discerning which chaos to pay attention to.
One time, this was a long time ago, I took a taxi and there was something not right about this guy. And I couldn't put my finger on it, but I was a little scared. I got out of the cab and he stopped, and I decided to walk in the middle of the street, like the middle of the avenue. Somebody's going to kill me. Somebody will help me. It was just, and he stayed there for a while and then he left. Because I was walking in the middle of Second Avenue.
Wow. Was it nighttime or?
Yeah, it was nighttime, but there's always traffic.
Traffic,
And
yeah.
I just felt like somebody will see
What do you
me.
think made you think that? What were do you remember any of the signs?
No, I don't really. It was a long time ago, but it just, there was something about him that was maybe asking questions that were too personal or something. I
Wow.
just knew that I needed to get out, and I did.
That is brilliant. I love that story because that is exactly what we're
Yeah.
going for. I mean, that's exactly because I think it was, I can't remember where I read this. It might have been in Gavin de Becker in Gift of Fear, which is a book everyone should be reading. And it's actually fun to read. It's really quite a brilliant little book. It's specifically about intuition and abiding by those signs and signals. So it's a really great book because it really articulates clearly those particular, what you just talked about. There's some wonderful stories to that effect. But he talks about there's no animal, I believe it's Gavin de Becker, there's no animal in nature, large or small, that would get in an elevator or a cab with someone who gave them pause and stay there to be polite.
Yeah,
Right.
it's true.
We will.
Yeah.
I don't want to make him feel bad. I don't want to be rude.
Yeah.
Oh yeah. Yeah. No, well, not exactly happened to me, but I was mugged. I had just moved into my an apartment in the city. And so I was coming home from work. I'd gone grocery shopping. I had, like grocery bags. And I lived in a building that, it didn't have a doorman or anything. It's like a small building. And, so I go into the vestibule and I stick my key in the door. Now, I had kind of seen this guy like at the corner of my eye, kind of following me, and I got a bad vibe immediately. And so I really made a beeline to get right into that vestibule. And, just my strategy was, let me just get right in there and slam the door behind me so he can't get in. But that did not happen. He was right behind me. And the elevator.
Could you have not gone into the vestibule?
I was already in it. I mean, it was, it was just bad. I was already in it. I had opened the door. I figured maybe I can just slam the door. Anyway, that did not work out. He went right in, he just zipped in right behind me. The elevator was open. I should have gotten it. I should not have gotten into the elevator. But I got in the elevator and he was right there. He was right there.
What happened?
Well, he pulled out a knife and said, "Give me all your money." And he said, "Don't scream or else." And I said, "Well, I'll give you my money, but I'm like negotiating with this guy. I said, "Yeah, but I need like $10 for the weekend." And he's like, "Okay."
Wow.
And then I gave him, basically, I gave him the money and then I screamed and he ran.
Oh, but that's a funny story. It's
Yeah,
scary,
but
but
you did great though. You didn't, I mean,
yeah,
you don't think if you'd had a little bit of training, you probably wouldn't have gotten in the elevator, but where else could you have gone? I mean, run up the stairs?
Yeah, exactly. And you have to
Uh,
understand the
You could have
space
knocked on
was
other doors. I mean, you run up the stairs knocking on other doors, you drop
right,
whatever you're carrying and you run up the stairs and knock on other doors, but it's not if you don't think about those options ahead of time,
right.
you don't know, right?
I love that you negotiated.
Oh,
I
I
love it
thought
too.
that was the
saying
funniest thing.
right. No.
But I need $10.
That's a great story, by the way. That's what's interesting about both stories you just told me, and it's kind of a case and point for why self-defense for women needs to be different than it is for men, is that how many men have these stories? Almost every single woman I've met.
Mm,
Like, oh yeah, I was held at knife point. Oh yeah, I was mugged. Only a fraction of the guys have anything even vaguely to talk about, except, yeah, some guy cursed at me and pushed me, wanted to start a fight. But getting into a fight is not the same as being held at knife point, right? A fight is not the same as a self-defense situation, right? You're carrying your groceries into your vestibule and going home, and all of a sudden you find some aggressive guy there with a knife in a small space who's threatening you. Um, and most men don't have these stories, and the answers for them are utterly different. And every martial art, claims to have and has some answers. There's some good answers, but they're spread out across martial arts. And the problem is you're not going to get all the answers you need about self-defense from one martial art style. The truth is what you know is a lot more helpful, and the kind of techniques you're going to do, um, the kind of physical actions you're going to take if someone's attacking you, anyone can learn. And one of the things I discuss in the book is something that I learned from the last martial art that I took. It was really a genius art form. Sayak Kali is a Filipino martial art that considers everything a martial art and considers knowledge of and health part of self-defense and self-care, um, and family protection. So knowing things and being able to find weapons and know which ones are going to work for you and which ones aren't, and you know, you don't need a lot of training. I mean, certainly you would be better with some training, but you don't need a lot of training to headbutt someone or stab them with a pencil. Um,
Well, all that training kind of will help you determine what am I going to do and uh, where can I stab him. I mean, the training is important.
the training is important, but you can get that training. You can get some of that training from a book, and
Yes,
there are not a lot of martial arts that even discuss those things.
really.
There are not. They don't discuss that in Taekwondo. I did Taekwondo for 15 years. Now, it was a long time ago. Taekwondo is different now, but I believe it's even more acrobatic. I took traditional Taekwondo, and we would kick and punch and fight and spar and, laugh and have fun, and it was all great.
Right.
No one ever talked about blood or what would happen if you actually kicked someone in the head and they lost their teeth or
Mm.
shattered their nose. We never discussed that ever. And that was one of the things that was so shocking to me. Like, I'm doing all this crazy stuff and no one's ever talked about first aid or what could happen if you did this to somebody.
I know you touched on this a bit earlier. You do encourage, and as you've been saying, people to learn, to get out there and find information, and to also try to help others. Can you suggest some resources where people can go to learn more about self-defense and maybe find classes that are right for them?
Well, the reason I wrote the book is because I don't have those answers. People have asked me for so long, where do I go? What do I do? How do I learn? Right? Usually it's someone who something happened to. Um, that's the trigger, that causes people to start looking for something, women particularly to start looking for something, or, they have a friend who's doing it and they join their friend. Um, I could suggest that Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu is predominantly performed on the floor, and you trained to move on the floor if somebody gets on top of you. And that's a really good thing to know how to do. The problem with it is 99% of Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu instructors are men and have never been in a situation. So there are nuances to the way that rapes happen and the way that things happen. And part of the problem with Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu is they do a lot of arm bars and chokes. The whole time you're holding on to him in a choke, he's doing whatever he's doing to you. And can you withstand that when he outweighs you by 150 pounds? My other problem with Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu and why it's only a part of the question is you really don't want, I mean, again, you're training to be on the floor with a big guy just in case. What if you spent that same amount of time training on how not to end up on the floor? But you also want to do a lot of stand-up training, stand-up grappling, which is where judo excels, so that you don't end up on the floor. So now you're training in judo and jujitsu. Then you want something like Krav Maga or Kali, where you're learning multiple ways of striking, multiple ways of using your legs to offset balance, multiple ways to use your environment and all the different types of tools that you can use in your environment. So now you're talking about 3 or 4 martial arts to study.
Or you buy reimagined self-defense.
Part of the reason I wrote this book is because everyone has a different lifestyle. So I think each woman has a specific question they're asking about a specific situation that they're in. They're in the country, they have 6 kids. They're in the city, they're pregnant. Right? And what you want to do is answer the questions that are most urgent to you. So you just want to choose carefully, but the most important thing that I recommend is an instructor. Look for an instructor who your instincts are at ease around, right? Because martial arts and instructors, it's kind of a power-driven thing. There's a master, there's someone in charge, there's a lot of deference. And anybody who, when you ask questions over and over again, and I learned this over many years, shuts you down and tells you,
Really?
got it, we'll answer those questions, or don't worry so much, you're going to be fine, or whatever, right? That's the exact opposite of self-defense. If anyone is shutting you down, they are disregarding your intuition. They
Exactly.
are keeping you from asking the questions that are going to keep you safe. Find an instructor who is willing to listen to your concerns as a woman. And even female instructors, they have been raised by male instructors. And that's why I wrote this book. Women are not going to spend 12 hours a day training on this stuff. What they need is a little bit of knowledge and a way to train daily in their head. Oh, I just noticed that. Oh, what would this book or that book suggest I think about in this situation? And in that way, you train in little bits and pieces daily. And they're really important skill sets. One of my favorite to mention is de-escalation, and no one really knows what that is, and it's a rather complex thing. Most people think it's about staying calm. Well, to some extent, it is about staying calm because escalation is emotions getting higher, and de-escalation is not throwing gasoline on the fire and trying to lower the emotions. And when you have someone who's really upset and freaking out and maybe picking something up and coming at you, what you don't want to do is escalate. But when they first start yelling at you before they've picked something up, the first person you want to de-escalate is you. Because when your ex-husband comes into your salon, which happened to a woman, and says, listen, we're getting back together, whether you like it or not, or whatever, or this is what I think of you. And you go, no, this is what I think of you. Then he picks something up. And then you're in a coma. It happened to somebody who I know. So what you want to do, the first thing to do is de-escalate yourself. It's probably the best self-defense technique that you can offer anybody is to learn how to self-de-escalate, because when something raises your hackles, they go up fast and hard, and shutting yourself down or trying to make good decisions is virtually impossible. I mean, every mother of a screaming 4-year-old in a grocery store, how hard it is to de-escalate yourself when the kid is going, I want candy, candy, I want candy. And you're going, no candy. And they're screaming and everyone's staring at you, right? Staying calm, is very hard. But it's kind of like freaking out when someone else is freaking out is triggering the chase instinct, right? And the bear won't necessarily chase you if you just stand there, but you start running.
Yes.
Yes, it's that.
And that's when the trouble starts. So there are a lot of skill sets that just aren't taught because they're hard to teach. You know, it's no fun to learn de-escalation. You don't get to show somebody this cool technique that you used and that you learned, and it's difficult. It's a lot more difficult to learn how to de-escalate your own emotions and other people's emotions than it is to learn a really good kick.
Wow, this has been
It's
completely
amazing.
awesome. So much. This is an eye-opener. So if people have questions, can they contact you?
They can contact me through my website. So TejaVanWicklen.com is the website. It's TEJA VanWicklen, VanWicklen.com, my author site.
And where can they get the book? More
They'll be able to get the book on February 3rd at Barnes & Noble, Amazon, wherever, everywhere.
fabulous.
Great.
Ebook,
Great.
and I have to work on the Audible version. So that won't be out for a while.
We will look forward to
Oh, yeah.
actually reading it from cover to cover.
Yes.
Thank you guys so much.
Because you sent us the excerpts, but now after talking to you, I'm like, oh, I want to read this book. Thanks for joining us. We'd love to hear from you, so please visit our website at nowletstalkthepodcast.com and send us your comments and questions. We'll see you next time.